The jury indicted one of the three officers involved in a fatal shooting for firing into her neighbor's apartment. Taylor's family described the decision as outrageous and offensive. Hundreds of people defied an overnight curfew to protest against the ruling. They want the officers charged for murder or manslaughter. An outrage against the grand jury's decision has spread to other U.S. cities, including Washington, D.C. and New York. Large crowds of anti-racism protesters gathered, demanding justice for Breonna Taylor and an end to police brutality. John Hendren reports from Louisville.
Anger and a sense of justice denied spilled over into the streets of Louisville. Police, who have faced off with demonstrators in one American city after another, acted quickly.
Well, I think it's a slap in the face to everybody who believes in justice and goodness and rightness. It's the least of the charges that you can imagine happening. It's a naming of the charges that don't even mention Breonna Taylor's name.
It's not justice.
It's not justice.
Kentucky's Attorney General announced 3 charges of reckless endangerment against Brett Hankison, one of 3 officers who fired into the home of Breonna Taylor in March. She died seconds later.
There's no doubt that this is a gut-wrenching, emotional case, and the pain that many people are feeling is understandable. I deeply care about the value and sanctity of human life. It deserves protection, and in this case, a human life was lost. We cannot forget that.
The charges were for firing into the neighboring home of a white family of 3, not for the shooting of Taylor. The officer who fired the fatal shots was not charged.
Is that enough?
Hell no. That's not enough.
Taylor died after police, firing their weapons, stormed her apartment in March, carrying out a no-knock warrant for evidence against a friend of Taylor's. Her boyfriend, Kenneth Walker, says that moments before they entered, he had fired a shot through the door at what he thought were intruders. Taylor's family had hoped for murder charges.
The charges should have been murder. Arrest the cops. All the cops should have been arrested. How can you burst into someone's home, fire at them, kill them, and not be charged with anything less than murder?
Downtown Louisville has been boarded up for days in anticipation. A curfew set for 3 days. On the car behind me, you can see people, including the shirtless men, who were among the first people arrested in Louisville. Police asked them to disperse. They did not, and then they ended up in handcuffs. Armed, sometimes angry men and women walk the streets with assault rifles.
Keep me off camera.
Louisville police say they've arrested a suspect after 2 officers were shot during the evening.
Both officers are currently undergoing treatment at University Hospital. One is in alert and stable. The other officer is currently undergoing surgery and stable.
State lawmakers are not waiting. Representative Atticus Scott's Breonna Taylor law would end no-knock warrants, already banned in Louisville, and require officers serving warrants to wear body cameras.
I'm disappointed but not surprised. Justice was not served today, and so that's why we will continue to fight for Breonna Taylor and her family, and so that no other person is murdered by police with impunity.
It's a start.
Taylor's mother told Al Jazeera in June that her daughter's legacy would endure.
This isn't the way I would have wanted it to be. It's the way it landed, but in the end, she'll definitely still be helping people. She's changing the world.
That change has come at an unimaginable cost to her family. And in the view of the crowd in the streets, far too little cost to the officers who left her dead in her own home. John Hendren, Al Jazeera, Louisville, Kentucky.
Let's now bring in Isaac Bryan. He's the executive director of UCLA's Black Policy Projects. He's joining us from Los Angeles. Thanks very much for your time with us. What's your reaction to the lack of charges against the police officers linked to the death of Breonna Taylor?
It's a tragic day. It's a failure of the criminal legal system. And unfortunately, it's not all that surprising. We have a long history of failing to hold officers accountable when things like this happen. There's a number of different things that could have been changed in this situation to prevent this from happening. It's a tragedy, and we should all mourn the Taylor family.
The prosecutors in Kentucky, the Attorney General, said that the officers were justified in their use of force because someone was shooting at them. What do you make of that?
I think people have a right to bear arms. I think they were serving a no-knock warrant, and there shouldn't be any things as no-knock warrants, especially based on evidence gained by a special unit of a police department that hyper-polices a specific part of our community, our poorest, our blackest parts of the community. There's a lot of questions here that need to be unraveled about our system before we get the justice we deserve. But when it comes to accountability, I think we failed today. I think we failed the Taylor family, and I think we could have done better.
And if you look at the events that have transpired just over the past few hours, 2 officers have been shot in Louisville. I mean, do you fear that the escalating violence may just lead to more violence, and then this may undermine the message that people are trying to get across?
I think there have been a number of progressive pieces of legislation across the country. I think about the BREATHE Act. I think about a number of other bills looking critically about the role of law enforcement institutions in our country. They haven't gotten the traction that they need. We need to deal with structural violence. That's what causes problems for everybody, and that's rooted in systemic failures in our education systems and our public health infrastructures and our divestment from the institutions of health and well-being while we invest in our carceral systems. In Louisville, a disproportionate share of the city budget goes to hyper-policing when it could go to systems of care. So same systems of care that are preventing Black communities from thriving in the way that we need, especially during the COVID-19 crisis. We have more that we can do, and it's important for us to seek justice by pushing for further legislation.
How do you begin to change the system then?
We have to organize and we have to mourn. We have to grieve. And then we have to look at policies. No-knock warrants shouldn't exist. You shouldn't be fired from one department in a jurisdiction and allowed to work in another jurisdiction. We shouldn't have a disproportionate share of our civic resources going to our systems of harm, while our systems of care are completely undervalued and underfunded. We need to think critically about these moments in our history, because I don't want to have another unarmed person, another Black person, another Black woman die at the hands of law enforcement when we could be investing in systems of care that would prevent these incidences from occurring.
All right, Isaac Bryan, we thank you very much for speaking to us on Al Jazeera from Los Angeles.